Hashtag the hook. Sometimes the most powerful moments in life come from the most unexpected places. When Richard Morrison built his empire worth $3 billion, he thought money could solve every problem. He had mansions in 5 countries, a fleet of luxury cars, and enough wealth to buy anything his heart desired. But there was one thing his fortune couldn't fix: his daughter Emma's paralyzed legs. For 12 years, Richard had spent millions searching for a cure. The best doctors, the most advanced treatments, experimental surgeries in Switzerland. Nothing worked. Emma remained confined to her wheelchair, and Richard's guilt consumed him like a slow poison. He blamed himself for the accident that changed everything. Then, Rosa Martinez walked into their lives. A quiet woman from Guatemala who spoke broken English and carried everything she owned in a single suitcase. Richard barely noticed her when his assistant hired her as Emma's caretaker. She was just another employee, someone to help with the daily routines while he focused on running his business empire. But Rosa saw something that all the expensive specialists had missed. Something so simple, yet so profound, that it would challenge everything Richard thought he knew about healing, hope, and the true meaning of miracles. What Rosa did next would not only change Emma's life forever, it would transform a billionaire's understanding of what real wealth actually means. This is the story of how a woman with nothing taught a man who had everything the most valuable lesson of his life. Richard Morrison stood in his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the city sprawl beneath him like a conquered kingdom. At 55, he commanded Morrison Industries, a technology empire that stretched across 4 continents. His personal wealth exceeded $3 billion, accumulated through decades of strategic investments, technological innovations, and business deals that other executives could only dream of executing. The mahogany desk behind him held 3 phones that connected him directly to world leaders, stock exchanges, and corporate headquarters from Tokyo to London. His assistant managed a calendar so packed with meetings that some of the world's most powerful people waited months just to speak with him for 15 minutes. Richard Morrison was a man who made things happen with a single phone call. Yet none of that power mattered on the day that changed his life forever. It was Emma's 5th birthday, and Richard had promised to take her to the zoo. His daughter was the light of his world, a bright, energetic child who inherited her mother's warm smile and her father's stubborn determination. Sarah, Richard's wife, had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, leaving Richard to raise Emma alone. The loss had devastated him, but Emma's laughter helped heal the wounds that money couldn't touch. That Saturday morning started perfectly. Emma bounced around their Beverly Hills mansion, wearing her favorite pink dress and clutching a stuffed giraffe she planned to compare with the real animals. Richard had cleared his entire day, something his business partners thought was impossible. For once, the phones would go unanswered, the meetings could wait, and Richard Morrison would simply be a father. "Daddy, will the elephants remember me from last time?" Emma asked as they climbed into Richard's silver Bentley. Her eyes sparkled with the innocent curiosity that made every moment with her precious. "I'm sure they will, sweetheart," Richard replied, adjusting her booster seat. "You made quite an impression when you tried to feed peanuts to that big gray one." The drive to the Los Angeles Zoo should have taken 30 minutes. They were singing along to Disney songs on the radio, Emma's voice rising above his own as she performed an enthusiastic rendition of Under the Sea. Richard found himself laughing more than he had in months, remembering why he had built his empire in the first place: to give his daughter every opportunity, every adventure, every dream she could imagine. The accident happened at the intersection of Wilshire and Veteran. A delivery truck ran a red light at 45 miles per hour, slamming into the passenger side of the Bentley where Emma sat. The impact sent the luxury vehicle spinning across 3 lanes of traffic before it crashed into a concrete barrier. Richard regained consciousness in the ambulance, his head throbbing and his left arm clearly broken. But his only concern was for the small, silent form on the stretcher beside him. Emma lay unconscious, her pink dress torn and bloodied, medical equipment surrounding her like a technological cocoon. "Sir, you need to stay still," the paramedic said, trying to keep Richard from reaching for his daughter. "We're doing everything we can for her." The next 18 hours blurred together in a haze of sterile hospital corridors, concerned doctors, and Richard's growing desperation. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center's trauma unit became his world as surgeons worked to save Emma's life. Richard paced the waiting room like a caged animal, making frantic phone calls to locate the best specialists money could buy. Dr. James Crawford, the head of neurosurgery, finally emerged from the operating room at 2 in the morning. His face carried the weight of difficult news, and Richard's heart sank before the doctor spoke a single word. "Mr. Morrison, your daughter is stable, but I need to discuss her injuries with you," Dr. Crawford said, guiding Richard to a private consultation room. Emma has suffered severe spinal cord damage at the L1, L2 vertebrae. The impact compressed the neural pathways that control movement in her lower extremities. Richard stared at the doctor, his mind struggling to process the medical terminology. What does that mean exactly? Emma is paralyzed from the waist down. The damage appears to be complete, which means the likelihood of recovery is... Dr. Crawford paused, searching for the right words. "Mr. Morrison, I don't want to give you false hope. In cases like this, the paralysis is typically permanent." The word permanent echoed in Richard's mind like a death sentence. His little girl, who had been dancing around the kitchen that morning, would never walk again. The child who loved to run through their garden chasing butterflies, who climbed every playground structure with fearless determination, would spend the rest of her life confined to a wheelchair. Richard's world collapsed in that moment. All his wealth, all his power, all his connections, none of it could undo those catastrophic 30 seconds when the truck ran the red light. He had built an empire, but he couldn't repair his daughter's broken spine. When Emma finally woke up 3 days later, Richard was sitting beside her hospital bed, holding her small hand in his. Her first words broke his heart. "Daddy, why can't I feel my legs?" Richard struggled to explain the impossible, watching his daughter's face crumble as she began to understand that something fundamental had changed forever. The next few weeks in the hospital were a nightmare of physical therapy assessments, wheelchair fittings, and occupational therapy sessions designed to help Emma adapt to her new reality. The accident made national headlines. Billionaire's daughter injured in devastating crash appeared on front pages across the country. Reporters camped outside the hospital, hoping for exclusive interviews or photographs of the family's tragedy. Richard's security team worked overtime to protect Emma's privacy while she underwent countless medical procedures and evaluations. Richard spared no expense in seeking treatment for Emma. He flew in specialists from Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and renowned spinal cord research centers in Switzerland and Germany. Each consultation cost tens of thousands of dollars, and each expert delivered the same devastating conclusion. Emma's paralysis was complete and irreversible. Dr. Elena Hoffman from Zurich's Institute for Spinal Medicine spent 3 days evaluating Emma's case. Her assessment was thorough and brutally honest. "Mr. Morrison, I understand your hope for a different outcome, but I must be clear about your daughter's prognosis," Dr. Hoffman explained during their final consultation. "The MRI images show complete severing of the spinal cord. We have attempted experimental stem cell treatments in similar cases, but the success rate is less than 2%, and those improvements are typically minimal." Richard refused to accept defeat. Over the following months, he invested millions in cutting-edge treatments that existed more in laboratory theory than proven medical practice. Emma endured experimental surgeries, stem cell injections, electrical stimulation therapy, and revolutionary drug treatments that were still in clinical trials. Each failed attempt deepened Richard's guilt and desperation. He blamed himself for the accident, convinced that if he had left 5 minutes earlier or taken a different route, Emma would still be running and dancing. The guilt consumed him, affecting his business decisions and personal relationships. Richard's mansion became a medical facility. Physical therapists, occupational specialists, and nurses rotated through their home on strict schedules. The swimming pool was modified with hydraulic lifts and specialized equipment for aquatic therapy. Emma's bedroom was transformed into a high-tech rehabilitation center with parallel bars, exercise equipment, and monitoring devices. Despite all the medical intervention, Emma's condition remained unchanged. Her legs showed no sensation, no movement, no sign of the miraculous recovery that Richard desperately sought. The little girl who once filled their home with laughter became quiet and withdrawn. overwhelmed by the constant medical attention and her father's obvious anguish. After 18 months of failed treatments and mounting frustration, Richard made a decision that would change everything. Emma needed stability, not constant medical experimentation. She needed to feel like a child again, not a patient. Most importantly, she needed care from someone who saw her as a whole person, not just a medical case to be solved. Richard's assistant, Margaret, suggested hiring a full-time caregiver who could help Emma with daily activities while providing the emotional support she needed. The position required someone with medical training, experience with disabled children, and the patience to help Emma adapt to her new life. Margaret screened dozens of candidates over several weeks. Most were highly qualified nurses with impressive credentials and extensive experience in pediatric care. But when Rosa Martinez walked into Richard's office for her interview, something was different. Rosa was 42 years old, a soft-spoken woman from Guatemala who had immigrated to the United States 15 years earlier. Her English carried a heavy accent, and her resume was modest compared to the other candidates. She had worked as a caregiver for elderly patients and had no specific experience with spinal cord injuries or pediatric rehabilitation. Yet there was something about Rosa that impressed Margaret. During the interview, Rosa didn't focus on Emma's medical condition or the sophisticated equipment in the house. Instead, she asked about Emma's personality, her interests, her favorite activities before the accident. Rosa wanted to know about the child, not just the disability. What does Emma like to do for fun? Rosa asked, her English careful but sincere. Margaret was surprised by the question. Most candidates had focused on medical protocols, medication schedules, and physical therapy routines. Rosa seemed more interested in understanding Emma as a person. She used to love painting and reading stories, Margaret replied. She was very creative and loved to make up her own fairy tales. Rosa nodded thoughtfully. Children need to dream, to imagine, to create. Medicine is important, but joy is also medicine for the heart. When Margaret introduced Rosa to Richard, he was initially skeptical. Her qualifications seemed insufficient for Emma's complex needs, and her limited English concerned him. But Margaret insisted that Rosa possessed something that couldn't be measured on a resume: genuine compassion and an intuitive understanding of what Emma truly needed. Richard agreed to a trial period, primarily because he was exhausted from the long search for qualified caregivers. Rosa would work for 30 days, and if Emma didn't respond positively, they would continue looking for someone else. Rosa Martinez began her work at the Morrison mansion with quiet observation. While previous caregivers had immediately implemented strict medical routines and therapy schedules, Rosa spent her first week simply watching Emma, learning her patterns, understanding her moods, and discovering what remained of the joyful child beneath the weight of medical equipment and endless treatments. Emma's daily routine had become a series of clinical appointments. Physical therapy at 9 in the morning, occupational therapy at 11, educational tutoring in the afternoon, and evening sessions focused on building upper body strength and improving wheelchair mobility. The schedule was designed by medical professionals to maximize Emma's adaptation to her disability, but Rosa noticed something troubling. Emma was disappearing behind all the treatment protocols. The 12-year-old girl moved through her days with mechanical compliance, completing exercises without enthusiasm, participating in therapy sessions without engagement. She had learned to be a patient first and a child second, a transformation that broke Rosa's heart more than the wheelchair ever could. Richard rarely spent time with Emma beyond brief check-ins about her medical progress. The guilt from the accident had created an emotional distance between father and daughter. Richard threw himself into finding new treatments and funding research projects, convinced that his love for Emma was best expressed through his desperate search for a cure. He had spent over $15 million on medical interventions, but he had stopped seeing the person those treatments were supposed to help. Rosa's first innovation was simple but revolutionary. She asked Emma what she wanted to do. Not what the therapy schedule demanded, not what the doctors recommended, but what would bring joy to a 12-year-old girl who had forgotten how to be happy. "I miss painting," Emma admitted during their second week together. "But the easel in my art room is too high now, and sitting at the desk hurts my back after a few minutes." Previous caregivers had noted Emma's interest in art, but considered it secondary to medical priorities. Rosa saw it differently. That afternoon, she rearranged Emma's room, creating a low table positioned perfectly for wheelchair access. She gathered art supplies from various rooms in the mansion and set up an impromptu studio beside Emma's bed. "We paint now," Rosa announced with a smile that lit up her weathered face. For the first time in months, Emma's eyes showed genuine excitement. They spent 2 hours painting together, Rosa sharing stories about the vibrant murals in her hometown, while Emma experimented with colors she hadn't touched since the accident. When Richard came home that evening, he found his daughter covered in paint splatters, laughing as Rosa tried to recreate a Quetzal bird from memory. Richard's first instinct was concern about the mess and the disruption to Emma's therapy schedule. But something stopped him in the doorway. Emma was laughing. Really laughing, with the uninhibited joy he remembered from before the accident. He hadn't heard that sound in over a year. "Rosa, Emma has physical therapy in 30 minutes, Richard said, trying to maintain the medical routine that had become their life structure. Rosa looked at Emma's paint-covered hands and bright smile, then back at Richard with gentle defiance. "Today her therapy is joy. Her body heals better when her heart is happy." Richard wanted to argue, to insist on the importance of maintaining professional medical schedules. But Emma's transformation was undeniable. For the first time since the accident, she looked like a child again instead of a patient enduring treatment. Over the following weeks, Rosa continued to challenge the rigid medical approach that had dominated Emma's life. She introduced music into their daily routine, encouraging Emma to sing the traditional songs Rosa remembered from her childhood in Guatemala. Emma's voice, which had grown quiet and subdued, began to fill their home with melody again. Rosa also noticed Emma's growing social isolation. The accident had effectively ended Emma's friendships with her former playmates. Children her age were uncomfortable around the wheelchair, and their parents often discouraged visits, uncertain how to navigate the new dynamics of Emma's disability. Emma had become accustomed to adult interaction through her medical team, but she had lost the simple pleasure of friendship with peers. Rosa addressed this isolation in an unexpected way. She began telling Emma stories about children in Guatemala who faced various challenges: poverty, illness, family separation, but who found ways to create joy despite difficult circumstances. These weren't medical case studies or therapeutic narratives, but real stories about resilience, friendship, and the power of community support. "In my village, there was a boy named Carlos who lost his hearing in a fever," Rosa shared one evening as she helped Emma prepare for bed. "The other children learned to speak with their hands so Carlos could still play with them. They created new games that didn't need sound, and Carlos taught them how to feel music through their bodies by touching drums and guitars." Emma listened to these stories with fascination, beginning to understand that challenges could be overcome through creativity and community rather than just medical intervention. Rosa's tales opened Emma's mind to possibilities beyond the limitations that doctors had defined for her future. The real breakthrough came when Rosa suggested something that shocked everyone in the household. Emma should attend regular school instead of continuing with private tutoring at home. Richard immediately objected, citing Emma's medical needs, the potential for injury, and the specialized equipment required for her care. "She is not made of glass," Rosa said firmly during a tense conversation with Richard in his study. "Emma needs to be with children. She needs to feel normal, to have friends, to face challenges that are not about her legs." Dr. Crawford, Emma's primary physician, supported Richard's concerns about school attendance. The risk of infection, the potential for accidents, and the disruption to Emma's therapy schedule seemed to outweigh any social benefits. But Rosa persisted with quiet determination. She researched local schools with accessibility accommodations, contacted special education coordinators, and even visited several campuses to evaluate their facilities. Her English had improved significantly during her months with the Morrison family, and she approached each conversation with the passionate advocacy of someone fighting for her own child. Rosa's most compelling argument came from Emma herself. During one of their painting sessions, Emma created a picture of children playing together in a schoolyard. She had painted herself in a wheelchair, participating in the games rather than watching from the sidelines. "I want to try," Emma told her father that evening, showing him the painting. Rosa says being scared is normal, but being brave means doing things even when you're scared. Richard stared at his daughter's artwork, seeing a confidence and hope that had been absent for over a year. Emma's willingness to embrace risk and seek social connection showed a healing that no medical treatment had achieved. After extensive research and preparation, Richard enrolled Emma in West Side Elementary School's inclusive program. The transition required significant planning, accessibility modifications to ensure wheelchair access, coordination with the school nurse for Emma's medical needs, and careful selection of teachers who understood how to support students with disabilities. Emma's first day of school in over a year was terrifying and exhilarating. Rosa accompanied her, staying nearby, but allowing Emma to navigate social interactions independently. The other children were curious about the wheelchair, asking direct questions with the honest simplicity that adults often lacked. Emma discovered that she could answer their questions without embarrassment or sadness. Rosa had prepared her for these conversations, teaching her to explain her situation matter-of-factly while emphasizing her capabilities rather than her limitations. "My legs don't work because I was hurt in a car accident," Emma told a group of classmates during lunch. "But my arms are really strong now, and I can beat almost anyone at arm wrestling." The children were immediately interested in testing this claim, and soon Emma was engaged in friendly competition that focused on what she could do rather than what she couldn't. Rosa watched from across the cafeteria, tears of joy streaming down her face as Emma laughed and competed with her new friends. Richard received daily reports about Emma's school experience, initially through concerned phone calls from teachers and administrators worried about potential problems. But as weeks passed, the reports became celebrations of Emma's achievements and social integration. Emma's confidence grew exponentially as she discovered that other children accepted her wheelchair as simply one characteristic among many. She excelled academically, participated in adapted sports programs, and even joined the school's art club, where her paintings became locally famous for their vibrant colors and imaginative themes. Rosa's influence extended beyond Emma's social reintegration. Rosa Martinez had been caring for Emma Morrison for 8 months when she made an observation that would revolutionize everything the medical experts believed about the young girl's condition. It was during one of their evening painting sessions, a routine that had become sacred time for both of them, when Rosa noticed something extraordinary that had been overlooked by years of sophisticated medical examinations. Emma was working on a landscape painting, trying to capture the sunset over the Pacific Ocean that was visible from her bedroom window. As she concentrated intensely on mixing the perfect shade of orange for the evening sky, Rosa watched Emma's face contort with artistic frustration. The painting wasn't matching the vision in Emma's mind, and her perfectionist nature, inherited from her billionaire father, was driving her to increasing levels of determination. "The color is not right," Emma muttered, pressing harder with her brush against the canvas. "I need to make it more like fire, more alive." As Emma's artistic passion intensified, Rosa noticed something remarkable happening below the table where they worked. Emma's right foot, supposedly paralyzed and unresponsive for over 2 years, was moving slightly. Not the random muscle spasms that doctors had explained as normal in spinal cord injury patients, but purposeful, rhythmic movements that seemed to coincide with Emma's emotional state. Rosa watched carefully, not wanting to interrupt Emma's concentration or create false hope based on wishful thinking. But as minutes passed, the movement became more pronounced. Emma's foot was actually flexing and pointing in small but deliberate motions, as if responding to the intense focus and passion she was channeling into her artwork. Rosa had witnessed similar phenomena during her childhood in Guatemala. Her grandmother was a traditional healer who worked with patients the modern medical system couldn't help. Rosa had seen her grandmother encourage emotional expression and passionate engagement as pathways to physical healing. While Rosa had no medical training, her cultural background had taught her that the mind, body, and spirit were interconnected in ways that Western medicine often failed to recognize. Rather than immediately alerting Richard or the medical team, Rosa decided to conduct her own careful observation over the following weeks. She began creating situations where Emma would experience intense emotions, joy, excitement, determination, even controlled frustration, while discreetly monitoring Emma's lower body for any signs of response. During a particularly engaging art project where Emma was painting portraits of her new school friends, Rosa noticed the foot movements becoming more frequent and pronounced. Emma's entire right leg showed subtle signs of muscle tension and relaxation that corresponded to her emotional peaks during the creative process. Rosa also observed that music had a similar effect. When Emma sang along to her favorite songs or listened to emotionally powerful pieces, both of her legs showed small but noticeable responses. The movements were involuntary and seemed to occur when Emma was completely absorbed in activities that brought her genuine joy and emotional engagement. The most significant observation came during a video call with Emma's new best friend from school, a girl named Maria, who had become Emma's closest companion despite, or perhaps because of, their different backgrounds and challenges. Maria came from a working-class family and had initially been intimidated by Emma's wealth, but their shared love of art and storytelling had created a deep friendship. During their conversation, Maria was excitedly describing a school art competition she wanted Emma to enter. As Emma's enthusiasm grew, both of her legs began showing coordinated muscle responses. For several minutes, Emma's lower body displayed movement patterns that seemed to mirror her emotional engagement with the conversation. Rosa realized she was witnessing something that contradicted every medical assessment Emma had received. The paralysis might not be as complete or permanent as the specialists had concluded, but Rosa also understood that her observations, valuable as they might be, would need professional validation and careful investigation. The challenge was convincing Richard and the medical team to take seriously the insights of a Guatemalan caregiver with no formal medical training. Rosa had experienced enough prejudice and dismissal during her years in America to know that her accent, her background, and her lack of credentials would make many people skeptical of her observations. Rosa decided to document her findings meticulously. She began keeping a detailed journal, recording the specific circumstances when Emma's leg movements occurred, the duration and intensity of the responses, and the emotional or mental states that seemed to trigger them. She also started discreetly photographing and filming Emma during these moments, building evidence that could be presented to medical professionals. After 3 weeks of careful documentation, Rosa felt confident enough to approach Richard with her observations. She chose a quiet Sunday evening when Emma was sleeping and Richard was in his study, reviewing business reports. Rosa knocked softly on his door, carrying a folder containing her notes and evidence. "Mr. Morrison, I need to speak with you about Emma," Rosa said, her English more confident than when she had first arrived, but still carrying the careful precision of a non-native speaker. Richard looked up from his laptop, expecting another routine update about Emma's care or perhaps a request for supplies or equipment. Instead, Rosa's serious expression and the formal folder in her hands suggested something more significant. "What is it, Rosa? Is Emma having problems at school?" Rosa sat down across from Richard's desk, opening her folder and arranging several photographs and pages of handwritten notes. Her hands trembled slightly, knowing that what she was about to share would either be dismissed as impossible or recognized as monumentally important. "Mr. Morrison, I believe Emma's paralysis is not complete," Rosa said directly, watching Richard's face for his reaction. "I have observed movements in her legs that suggest some neural pathways may still be functional." Richard's expression shifted from polite attention to skeptical concern. Rosa's claim contradicted 2 years of expert medical opinions from the world's leading specialists in spinal cord injury. Multiple MRIs, nerve conduction studies, and neurological evaluations had confirmed that Emma's paralysis was complete and irreversible. "Rosa, I appreciate your concern for Emma, but her condition has been thoroughly evaluated by the best medical professionals in the world," Richard said carefully, trying not to dismiss Rosa's observations while maintaining his trust in established medical science. "Complete spinal cord transection doesn't allow for the kind of recovery you're describing." Rosa had anticipated this reaction. She pulled out her camera and showed Richard a series of videos she had recorded over the previous weeks. The footage clearly showed Emma's feet and legs displaying small but unmistakable movements during moments of intense emotional engagement. Richard watched the videos with growing amazement. The movements were subtle but undeniable. Emma's right foot flexing and pointing, both legs showing muscle tension changes, coordinated responses that seemed connected to Emma's emotional state rather than random spasms. "When does this happen?" Richard asked, his skepticism beginning to give way to cautious hope. Rosa explained her observations in detail, describing how Emma's leg responses correlated with passionate engagement in art, music, and emotional conversations. She shared her theory that Emma's healing might be connected to psychological and emotional factors rather than purely physical interventions. "In my country, we understand that the spirit and body heal together," Rosa explained. "When Emma is happy, when she is creating, when she feels strong emotions, her body remembers how to respond. The doctors look at pictures of her spine, but they do not see her whole person." Richard studied the evidence Rosa had gathered, his mind racing with possibilities and questions. If Rosa's observations were accurate, it would mean that Emma's condition might not be as hopeless as every medical expert had concluded. But it would also mean that 2 years of expensive treatments had been focused on the wrong approach entirely. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He reviewed Rosa's documentation repeatedly, analyzing the videos and reading her careful notes about the circumstances that triggered Emma's leg responses. The evidence was compelling, but it challenged everything he had been told about his daughter's condition. The next morning, Richard called Dr. Crawford to discuss Rosa's observations. The neurosurgeon's initial reaction was polite but dismissive, explaining that incomplete spinal cord injuries often produce muscle spasms that could be mistaken for voluntary movement by untrained observers. "Mr. Morrison, I understand your desire to find hope in any possible sign of improvement," Dr. Crawford said with practiced patience. "But Emma's MRI results show complete spinal cord transection. The neural pathways necessary for voluntary leg movement have been severed. What your caregiver observed were likely involuntary muscle contractions, which are common in patients with complete paralysis." Richard found himself in an unusual position, defending Rosa's observations against established medical authority. Something about the videos and Rosa's detailed documentation convinced him that her insights deserved serious investigation rather than casual dismissal. "Doctor, I respect your expertise, but I'd like you to examine Emma again with these new observations in mind," Richard said firmly. "If there's even a possibility that her condition has been misdiagnosed or that some recovery is possible, don't we owe it to Emma to investigate thoroughly?" Dr. Crawford agreed to schedule new neurological tests, though his tone suggested he was humoring a desperate father rather than pursuing a legitimate medical inquiry. Richard also decided to seek second opinions from specialists who hadn't been involved in Emma's previous care, hoping for fresh perspectives unburdened by earlier conclusions. Meanwhile, Rosa continued her work with Emma, now openly encouraging the activities that seemed to trigger leg responses. She introduced more music into their daily routine, organized emotionally engaging art projects, and facilitated video calls with Emma's school friends that generated the passionate enthusiasm associated with Emma's leg movements. Emma remained unaware of the medical significance of these activities. Rosa was careful not to create false expectations or pressure Emma to produce specific responses. Instead, she focused on maximizing Emma's emotional engagement and joy, trusting that the physical responses would follow naturally. The neurological evaluation took place 2 weeks later at Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. Dr. Crawford conducted comprehensive tests while Rosa provided detailed information about when and how Emma's leg movements occurred. For the first time, the medical examination included assessment of Emma's responses during emotionally engaging activities rather than just clinical neurological testing. The results were unprecedented. While Emma still showed no volunta, the revelation that Emma's paralysis might not be complete transformed the Morrison household into a center of revolutionary medical experimentation. Dr. Crawford, initially skeptical of Rosa's observations, now worked closely with her to develop treatment protocols that no medical textbook had ever described. Richard found himself funding research that combined traditional neurological rehabilitation with emotional therapy, artistic expression, and the cultural healing wisdom that Rosa brought from Guatemala. Emma remained at the center of this transformation, still unaware that her condition had been reclassified from hopeless to possible. Rosa insisted that Emma should not know about the new medical discoveries until they produced concrete results. Creating false expectations could damage Emma's psychological recovery, which Rosa believed was fundamental to any physical healing. The new treatment approach was unlike anything Cedars-Sinai Medical Center had ever implemented. Instead of sterile clinical sessions focused on mechanical repetition of exercises, Emma's therapy became an integrated program that engaged her emotions, creativity, and passion alongside traditional physical rehabilitation. Dr. Crawford collaborated with Dr. Sarah Chun, a specialist in neuroplasticity from UCLA Medical Center, to design protocols that would encourage the surviving neural pathways to develop stronger connections. Their approach combined targeted electrical stimulation with activities that Rosa had identified as triggers for Emma's leg responses. The treatment sessions took place in a transformed therapy room that looked more like an artist's studio than a medical facility. Rosa had convinced Richard to install professional art supplies, musical instruments, and technology for video calls with Emma's friends. The goal was creating an environment where Emma could experience the intense emotional engagement that seemed to activate her dormant neural pathways. Emma's typical therapy session began with Rosa guiding her through traditional Guatemalan breathing exercises while Dr. Chin attached electrodes to specific points along Emma's spine and legs. The electrical stimulation was designed to enhance neural pathway function during moments when Emma was naturally generating the brain activity associated with movement and tension. "Today we paint your dreams," Rosa would announce as they began each session, encouraging Emma to visualize walking, running, or dancing while engaging in artistic creation. As Emma's imagination and emotions intensified, the electrical stimulation worked to strengthen whatever neural connections remained intact. The first signs of progress appeared 6 weeks into the new treatment protocol. During an art session where Emma was painting a picture of herself playing soccer with her school friends, Dr. Chun noticed coordinated muscle responses in both of Emma's legs. Instead of random muscle contractions, Emma's legs displayed movement patterns that corresponded to the running motions she was visualizing while painting. Rosa observed from across the room, tears streaming down her face as she watched Emma's body begin to respond to her mind's instructions. The electrical stimulation seemed to amplify Emma's natural neural responses, creating stronger signals than her damaged spinal cord could generate independently. Over the following weeks, Emma's responses became stronger and more frequent. During music therapy sessions, where Emma sang traditional songs Rosa had taught her, both of Emma's legs showed rhythmic movements that matched the musical tempo. When Emma video called her best friend Maria to discuss school projects, her leg muscles displayed tension patterns that suggested her brain was attempting to generate walking motions. Dr. Chin documented everything meticulously, knowing that Emma's case could revolutionize treatment approaches for spinal cord injuries. The combination of emotional engagement, electrical stimulation, and what Dr. Chun was beginning to call hope therapy was producing neurological responses that contradicted established medical understanding. Richard watched these developments with a mixture of wonder and fear. After 2 years of accepting Emma's permanent paralysis, the possibility of recovery felt almost too precious to believe. He had learned to protect himself from hope, having experienced too many crushing disappointments with previous treatments. But Rosa remained unwavering in her optimism. Her cultural background had taught her that healing often required faith alongside medical intervention. She encouraged Richard to believe in possibilities rather than limiting himself to medical probabilities. "In Guatemala, we say that the heart teaches the body how to heal," Rosa explained to Richard during one of their evening conversations. "Emma's heart is strong now. She has friends. She creates beautiful art. She dreams of her future. Her body will follow where her spirit leads." The breakthrough moment came during Emma's 13th birthday celebration. Richard had planned a small party with Emma's school friends, held in their backyard garden that Emma had once loved to explore before the accident. Rosa had decorated the space with Emma's paintings and had prepared traditional Guatemalan foods alongside Emma's favorite cake. As the celebration reached its peak, with Emma surrounded by laughing friends and engaged in animated conversation about her latest art projects, something extraordinary happened. Emma, caught up in excitement and trying to reach for a paintbrush that had fallen near her wheelchair, instinctively attempted to stand. For the first time in over 2 years, Emma's legs responded to her brain's command. She didn't stand completely, and the movement lasted only a few seconds, but her legs generated enough coordinated muscle power to lift her partially from her wheelchair before muscle fatigue caused her to settle back down. The moment was witnessed by everyone at the party: her friends, Rosa, Richard, and Dr. Chun, who had attended as both medical observer and invited guest. The garden fell silent as everyone processed what they had just seen. Emma stared down at her legs with amazement, not quite understanding what had happened but sensing that something fundamental had changed. Her friends gathered around her wheelchair, their excitement matching Emma's confusion and wonder. Did my legs just move? Emma asked, looking from Rosa to Dr. Chun for confirmation. Rosa knelt beside Emma's wheelchair, taking her hands and speaking with the gentle honesty that had characterized their entire relationship. Yes, mi amor. Your legs are remembering how to listen to your heart. That night, Richard sat beside Emma's bed as Rosa explained everything that had been discovered over the previous months. Emma learned about the misdiagnosis, the new understanding of her condition, and the possibility that her paralysis might not be permanent. Emma's reaction surprised everyone. Instead of overwhelming excitement or unrealistic expectations, she displayed the mature wisdom of someone who had learned to find joy regardless of physical limitations. So I might walk again? Emma asked thoughtfully. But even if I don't, I'm still okay, right? I have friends, I can paint, I go to school. My life is good. Rosa smiled with pride at Emma's response. The healing process had given Emma something more valuable than the mere possibility of walking. It had given her an unshakable sense of self-worth and possibility that existed independently of her physical condition. The medical team intensified Emma's treatment following the birthday breakthrough. Dr. Chun brought in additional specialists who were fascinated by the unprecedented combination of approaches that were producing such remarkable results. Emma's case was being documented as a potential model for treating other patients with similar injuries. Progress continued steadily over the following months. Emma began experiencing sensation in her legs for the first time since the accident. Initially just tingling and vague pressure sensations, but gradually developing into more specific feeling that allowed her to sense temperature, touch, and position. The return of sensation was followed by increasing muscle control. Emma learned to flex her ankles voluntarily, then to bend her knees, and eventually to generate enough coordinated muscle activity to support some of her weight while holding onto parallel bars. Each advancement was celebrated as a victory, but Rosa and Dr. Chun were careful to maintain realistic expectations. Full recovery remained unlikely, and Emma's progress might plateau at any point. The goal was maximizing whatever recovery was possible while ensuring that Emma's sense of self-worth remained independent of her physical capabilities. Emma's school friends became an integral part of her healing process. Maria and her other classmates visited regularly, bringing homework assignments, school gossip, and the normal social interactions that kept Emma connected to her peer group. Their presence provided the emotional engagement that seemed essential for Emma's neurological recovery. The art projects that Rosa had initiated as simple therapy became something much more significant. Emma's paintings evolved from basic emotional expression into sophisticated artistic statements that reflected her journey from despair to hope to acceptance. A local gallery expressed interest in displaying Emma's work, recognizing artistic merit that transcended her personal story. Richard watched his daughter's transformation with wonder that extended far beyond her physical progress. Emma had developed confidence, resilience, and emotional maturity that surpassed many adults. She faced uncertainty about her recovery without anxiety, embraced challenges without fear, and maintained optimism without denying reality. The greatest miracle wasn't Emma's improving physical condition. It was her complete psychological healing from the trauma that had defined her life for over 2 years. Rosa's approach had restored Emma's sense of agency, purpose, and joy. Even if her legs never functioned perfectly, Emma had recovered something more fundamental: her belief in her own potential and worth. After 8 months of the new treatment protocol, Emma achieved what 2 years after Rosa Martinez first walked into the Morrison mansion carrying everything she owned in 2 worn suitcases. The household had transformed into something Richard could never have imagined. The sterile medical facility atmosphere had been replaced by the warmth of a true home, filled with Emma's artwork, Rosa's traditional cooking aromas, and the constant sound of laughter from Emma's friends who now visited regularly. Emma's recovery had plateaued at a level that allowed her to walk short distances with assistance, stand independently for several minutes, and maintain enough leg strength to participate in modified sports activities at school. While she still relied on her wheelchair for longer distances and complex mobility, the improvement was miraculous by any medical standard. More importantly, Emma had become a completely different person from the withdrawn, silent patient she had been before Rosa's arrival. Now 15 years old, she was confident, articulate, and passionate about art, social justice, and helping other children with disabilities. Her paintings had been featured in 3 gallery exhibitions, with proceeds donated to spinal cord injury research and programs supporting families dealing with childhood disabilities. Richard observed his daughter's transformation with a mixture of pride and humility. The billionaire who had once believed money could solve any problem had learned that the most valuable healing came from sources that couldn't be purchased. Rosa's compassion, cultural wisdom, and unwavering faith had accomplished what $15 million in medical treatments had failed to achieve. The medical community had taken notice of Emma's unprecedented recovery. Dr. Chun had published research papers documenting the innovative treatment protocols that combined traditional rehabilitation with emotional engagement and cultural healing practices. Cedars-Sinai Medical Center now offered a Morrison program for spinal cord injury patients, integrating artistic expression, music therapy, and family-centered care into standard medical treatment. Rosa had become something of a celebrity in rehabilitation medicine circles, invited to speak at conferences about her observations and insights. Despite her lack of formal credentials, medical professionals recognized that her cultural background and intuitive understanding of human healing had contributed to breakthrough advances in treating spinal cord injuries. But Rosa remained focused on Emma and the Morrison family rather than pursuing fame or professional recognition. Her relationship with Emma had evolved from caregiver to mentor to beloved family member. Richard had offered to fund Rosa's education if she wanted to pursue formal medical training, but Rosa declined, preferring to continue her work as a bridge between traditional healing wisdom and modern medical practice. The transformation extended to Richard himself. The distant, guilt-ridden father who had thrown himself into business as escape from his daughter's condition had become fully present in Emma's life. He attended every school event, celebrated every artistic achievement, and participated in the daily routines that Rosa had established to keep their family connected. Richard's business empire continued to thrive, but his approach to success had fundamentally changed. He began incorporating employee wellness programs inspired by Rosa's holistic health philosophy. Morrison Industries developed partnerships with organizations serving disabled children, funding art therapy programs, and supporting research into innovative rehabilitation techniques. The corporate executive who had once measured success purely in financial terms now understood that true wealth included relationships, health, purpose, and the ability to contribute to others' well-being. Richard's business decisions began reflecting these broader values, earning Morrison Industries recognition as one of America's most socially responsible companies. Emma's influence extended beyond her own recovery. Her art teacher at school connected her with other young artists facing various challenges, and Emma began mentoring children whose disabilities made them feel isolated or hopeless. Her combination of artistic talent, personal experience with adversity, and Rosa's lessons about resilience made her an extraordinarily effective advocate for other kids. Emma's most ambitious project was creating an illustrated book about her recovery journey, written in collaboration with Rosa and featuring paintings that documented her emotional and physical healing process. The book would be published with all proceeds supporting families dealing with childhood spinal cord injuries, providing both practical resources and inspirational guidance. The book project brought Emma and Rosa even closer together as they worked to translate Rosa's cultural wisdom and Emma's personal experience into stories that could help other families navigate similar challenges. Their collaboration demonstrated the power of intergenerational learning and cross-cultural understanding. Rosa shared traditional Guatemalan stories about overcoming adversity, while Emma contributed her perspective as a young person learning to thrive despite physical limitations. Together, they created narratives that honored both indigenous healing wisdom and modern medical advances, showing how different approaches to wellness could complement and strengthen each other. Richard watched their collaboration with amazement, recognizing that his daughter and Rosa had developed a creative partnership that transcended their original caregiver-patient relationship. They had become co-teachers, sharing insights that could benefit countless other families facing similar challenges. The Morrison family's story attracted national media attention when Emma was featured on a major television program, highlighting young people making significant social contributions. The interview focused on Emma's art, her advocacy work, and her perspective on overcoming adversity, but she consistently credited Rosa with teaching her the most important lessons about resilience and hope. During the interview, Emma was asked what she would tell other children facing serious health challenges. Her response reflected Rosa's influence, while demonstrating her own matured wisdom. "I learned that being disabled doesn't mean being broken," Emma said confidently. "My wheelchair doesn't define my possibilities. It's just one tool I use to explore the world. Rosa taught me that healing happens in your heart first, and then your body can follow. But even if your body can't do everything you want, your spirit can still soar." The interviewer asked Emma about her relationship with Rosa, and Emma's face lit up with obvious affection and gratitude. "Rosa saved my life, but not the way people think," Emma explained. "She didn't make my legs work. She taught me that my legs were never the most important part of me. She showed me that I could paint, make friends, go to school, help other people, and dream about my future. Rosa taught me that I was still whole, even when my body was broken." Rosa watched the interview from backstage, tears streaming down her face as she heard Emma articulate lessons that reflected their shared journey. The quiet woman from Guatemala who had arrived with limited English and humble expectations had become instrumental in reshaping how one family, and increasingly, how medical professionals, understood healing, disability, and human potential. Following the television appearance, the Morrison family received hundreds of letters from families dealing with similar challenges. Parents shared their own struggles with children's disabilities, young people described feeling inspired by Emma's story, and medical professionals requested information about the innovative treatment approaches that had contributed to Emma's recovery. Richard realized that their family's experience had become a resource for others, and he felt a responsibility to share what they had learned. He established the Morrison Foundation for Integrated Healing, dedicated to funding research that combined traditional medical treatment with emotional, cultural, and spiritual approaches to recovery. The Foundation's first major initiative was creating treatment centers that would replicate the Morrison model of care that had been so effective for Emma. These centers would employ medical professionals alongside cultural healers, art therapists, music therapists, and family support specialists, providing comprehensive care that addressed patients' complete well-being rather than just their medical symptoms. Rosa became the Foundation's Director of Cultural Integration, a position that recognized her unique contributions to understanding healing as a holistic process. Despite never having imagined herself in such a role, Rosa embraced the opportunity to help other families benefit from the insights she had gained through her work with Emma. The Foundation also funded research into how cultural healing practices from various traditions could complement modern medical treatment. Rosa worked with researchers to document the traditional healing knowledge from her Guatemalan community, creating resources that could help medical professionals understand alternative approaches to wellness and recovery. Emma continued to thrive in all aspects of her life. She maintained excellent grades in school, while pursuing increasingly sophisticated artistic projects. Her paintings evolved from simple emotional expression to complex artistic statements that attracted attention from professional critics and collectors. At 16, Emma was accepted into a prestigious summer art program for gifted young artists. where she would study alongside other talented teenagers from around the world. The program required participants to live independently in dormitories and manage their daily needs without family support, a significant milestone for any teenager, but especially meaningful for someone who had spent years as a patient requiring constant medical supervision. Rosa helped Emma prepare for this independence with characteristic wisdom and practical support. Instead of focusing on Emma's physical limitations or potential challenges, Rosa emphasized Emma's strengths, problem-solving abilities, and the self-advocacy skills she had developed through years of managing her disability. "You are ready for this adventure," Rosa told Emma as they packed for the art program. "You know how to ask for help when you need it, how to adapt when things are difficult, and how to find joy in new experiences. These are gifts that will serve you well in everything you do." Richard struggled more than Emma or Rosa with the prospect of Emma living independently. His protective instincts, developed through years of medical crises and careful supervision, made it difficult to imagine Emma managing without constant support. But Rosa helped Richard understand that Emma's independence was essential for her continued growth and healing. Overprotection would ultimately limit Emma's potential more than her physical disability ever could. "She needs to spread her wings," Rosa counseled Richard during one of their evening conversations. "We have given her the strength and wisdom to fly. Now we must trust in what we have built together." Emma's summer at the art program was a complete success. She navigated the independence confidently, made friends from diverse backgrounds, and produced artwork that impressed her instructors and fellow students. Her paintings from that summer reflected a new maturity and artistic sophistication that marked her transition from talented amateur to serious artist. When Emma returned home, she was different in ways that went beyond artistic development. She had experienced life as an independent young adult rather than a patient or someone requiring special accommodation. The summer had proven to everyone, including Emma herself, that her disability was just one characteristic among many, not the defining feature of her identity or capabilities. As Emma prepared to begin her senior year of high school, the Morrison family reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as a desperate search for medical solutions to Emma's paralysis had evolved into a complete transformation of their understanding of healing, family, and what constituted a meaningful life. Richard looked at his daughter, confident, creative, compassionate, and preparing for college, and marveled at how different she was from the withdrawn, hopeless patient she had been before Rosa's arrival. Emma had not only recovered partial physical function but had developed into an exceptional young woman whose disability enhanced rather than limited her ability to contribute to the world. Rosa watched both Emma and Richard with quiet satisfaction, knowing that her work with the Morrison family represented the fulfillment of her deepest purpose. She had not only helped Emma heal but had taught a father and daughter that love, hope, and cultural wisdom could create possibilities that seemed impossible according to conventional understanding. The woman who had arrived carrying everything she owned in 2 suitcases had given the Morrison family treasures more valuable than Richard's entire fortune. Rosa had taught them that true wealth consisted of relationships, resilience, purpose, and the ability to find joy regardless of life's challenges. As Emma prepared for her future, college, artistic career, continued advocacy for people with disabilities, she carried with her the lessons Rosa had taught about healing, hope, and human potential. The billionaire's daughter who couldn't walk had learned to soar, guided by the wisdom of a humble woman who saw possibilities where others saw only limitations. Rosa Martinez had proven that sometimes the most profound gifts come from the most unexpected sources, and that healing, true healing, involves much more than medical intervention. Love, cultural wisdom, and unwavering faith in human potential could indeed create miracles that no amount of money could purchase. The story of Emma Morrison and Rosa Martinez would continue to inspire families around the world, demonstrating that disability need not define destiny, that healing takes many forms, and that the greatest wealth lies not in what we own but in how we love, support, and believe in each other's potential to overcome any challenge life presents. Everyone had considered impossible. During a therapy session where she was painting a picture of her family walking together on a beach, Emma stood up from her wheelchair and took 3 independent steps toward the canvas. The steps were unsteady and required tremendous effort, but they were unmistakably voluntary movement generated by Emma's own determination and muscular control. Dr. Chun immediately conducted neurological tests that confirmed restored function in neural pathways that had been considered permanently damaged. Emma's recovery was far from complete. She still required her wheelchair for most activities and might always need mobility assistance for longer distances. But the restoration of some walking ability represented a medical outcome that had been deemed impossible by every specialist who had evaluated her case. Rosa watched Emma's first steps with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose faith had been vindicated. Her observations, her cultural wisdom, and her unwavering belief in Emma's potential had contributed to a recovery that challenged medical orthodoxy and opened new possibilities for treating spinal cord injuries. But Rosa's most important contribution wasn't medical. It was teaching Emma and Richard that healing involves much more than physical restoration. The real miracle was Emma's journey from patient to artist, from victim to advocate, from hopeless to hopeful. Rosa had helped Emma discover that true strength comes from embracing life's challenges rather than being defeated by them. As Emma took her first tentative steps across the therapy room, reaching for a paintbrush to add finishing touches to her latest masterpiece, she embodied everything Rosa had always believed about human resilience and the power of love to create possibilities where none had existed before. Why muscle control during standard neurological tests? She displayed clear involuntary responses when engaged in activities that Rosa had identified as triggers. The new MRI revealed something remarkable. While the original spinal cord damage remained severe, there appeared to be some neural pathways that had not been completely severed. Dr. Crawford was forced to reconsider his original diagnosis. Emma's condition was more complex than a complete spinal cord transection. She appeared to have what medical literature described as an incomplete injury with severe impairment, a condition that carried very different implications for potential recovery. This is highly unusual, Dr. Crawford admitted to Richard after reviewing the new test results. The original imaging suggested complete paralysis, but these new findings indicate that some neural connections may have survived the trauma. If that's the case, then recovery, while still unlikely, is not impossible. Rosa's observations had accomplished something that millions of dollars in previous medical evaluations had missed. Her careful attention to Emma's emotional and psychological responses had revealed physical possibilities that purely clinical assessments had overlooked. Richard stared at the new medical reports, realizing that Rosa Martinez, a woman with no formal medical training, had seen what teams of specialists had missed. Her cultural understanding of mind-body connections, her careful observation skills, and her genuine love for Emma had led to a discovery that could change everything. The medical team began developing new treatment protocols based on Rosa's insights. Instead of focusing purely on physical rehabilitation, they would incorporate emotional engagement, artistic expression, and psychological wellness as integral components of Emma's therapy. But Rosa's most important contribution was yet to come. Her discovery about Emma's condition was only the beginning of a journey that would challenge conventional medicine, test the limits of hope, and demonstrate that sometimes the most profound healing comes from the most unexpected sources of wisdom. Gone teaching both Emma and Richard about her culture, sharing traditional recipes, teaching them Spanish phrases, and explaining the family-centered values that had shaped her own upbringing. These cultural exchanges brought warmth and connection to a household that had become sterile and medical in focus. Richard found himself learning as much from Rosa as Emma did. The woman who had arrived with limited English and modest credentials was teaching a billionaire businessman about priorities, relationships, and the true meaning of wealth. Rosa's approach to problem-solving relied on human connection, creativity, and emotional intelligence, skills that Richard had overlooked in his corporate success, but desperately needed in his personal life. One evening, Richard discovered Rosa in the kitchen, teaching Emma to make traditional Guatemalan tamales. Emma was actively participating from her wheelchair, mixing ingredients and shaping the corn dough with obvious enjoyment. The scene was messy, chaotic, and completely unrelated to any medical protocol, but Emma was more animated than Richard had seen her since before the accident. "We are making food for the heart," Rosa explained when Richard asked about the culinary project. "When we cook together, we share stories, we laugh. We remember that food is love made visible." Richard realized that Rosa had succeeded where millions of dollars in medical treatment had failed. She had helped Emma rediscover joy, purpose, and connection. More importantly, Rosa had taught Emma that her wheelchair was not a limitation, but simply a different way of moving through the world. The transformation wasn't just physical or social, it was spiritual. Emma had regained her sense of possibility, her willingness to dream, and her belief that her future could be filled with adventure and achievement. Rosa's unconventional methods had proven that healing involves much more than medical intervention. As Rosa continued her work with Emma, she began to notice something that would lead to an even more remarkable development. Her careful observation and intuitive understanding of Emma's condition would soon reveal a possibility that all the expensive specialists had missed. Rosa's background might have been humble, but her insights were about to challenge everything the medical community believed about Emma's prognosis. Richard was about to learn that sometimes the most profound discoveries come from the most unexpected sources, and that wisdom doesn't always wear a white coat or carry expensive credentials. Rosa Martinez was preparing to demonstrate that love, attention, and unwavering belief in human potential could achieve what sophisticated technology and experimental treatments could not. Rosa Martinez moved into the guest quarters of the Morrison mansion on a crisp October morning. She carried everything she owned in two worn suitcases and a small wooden box that contained photographs of her own family back in Guatemala. Richard watched from his office window as Rosa examined the elaborate medical equipment in Emma's room, her expression thoughtful rather than intimidated. That afternoon, Rosa met Emma for the first time. The 12-year-old girl was in her wheelchair, staring out her bedroom window at the garden she could no longer explore. Emma had grown accustomed to new caregivers, and she greeted Rosa with polite but distant courtesy. "Hello, Emma," Rosa said, her voice warm and gentle. "I am Rosa. I am here to be your friend." Emma looked up at the woman with curious eyes. Previous caregivers had introduced themselves with their credentials, their experience, and their plans for Emma's care. Rosa was the first person who simply offered friendship. What happened next would begin a transformation that no one could have predicted. Rosa had noticed something that all the expensive specialists had overlooked, and her approach to helping Emma would challenge everything Richard believed about healing, hope, and the power of human connection. The billionaire who thought money could solve any problem was about to learn that sometimes the most valuable gifts come from the most unexpected sources. Rosa Martinez, carrying nothing but compassion and an unshakable belief in human potential, was about to change both Emma's life and her father's understanding of what true wealth really means.